So what is it that kept this small primate going? Put your hands up. Do this. Put your hands up. Make a fist. Do this. Ow, indeed. What we figured out early on as a species is that we were a lot stronger when we came together than we were when we were apart. And so whatever was out there with big eye and fang and fur and teeth understood how not to mess with us. Now, how did they understand that? All of our ancestors, think about them being on that savannah in Africa, trekking across an unknown land looking for something to eat and a way to survive. So here we are. We got our communities. We figured out how to tame something. It's flickering, and it's hot, and it's yellow and orange. What's it called? Right. So whatever was out there looking to take us out understood that whatever that thing was with its animal mind was what had taken out its family, what had destroyed its home, what had probably killed its kids. What it saw was a small primate species that had somehow learned to control it. Then what did we do? We began to dance around this thing that we understand as fire. And so what do? We put our hands to each other's hips and we moved in a circle. And we sang and we created grunts loudly. Now you think about watching this with that animal mind, out there in the jungle, hoping to take one of us out. What it sees is a being that can break itself apart, come back together, has multiple legs, and is loud, and has controlled fire. What that says to that animal mind is that those beings are stronger than me when they're together. They're louder than me. They've controlled something I do not understand. You gonna try to mess with that? You're gonna go find you a squirrel. Something other than mess with those. Now, our ancestors, just like us, were very complex. We learned to read faces and understand what faces meant. We learned to read words and understand what they mean. So, we're extraordinarily violent as a species. That's how we survived in a land like that. Anything that had a face we didn't recognize over there in that bush that's wiggling was going to get taken out. Those ancestors that might have been a bit more kind and altruistic at first says, hey, if there's something over there, I'm not going to take it out, I'm going to go and hug it. Guess what? They did not live long enough to pass on their genetic material. We are the descendants of the people that said, I'm going to go over there and see what's in that bush and I'm going to bring something to hit it with. However, we realized that that impulse toward violence did not create community. That did not keep us together. So we had to develop something else that bound us together as a people. And so in every one of our human cultures that have language, and all of them do, we developed ways of speaking to our tribe, talking to our tribe, bringing our tribe together during the hardest times in between the hunt. And at some point, somebody would stand up. I happen to think it was most likely a woman. Women have a facility with language at an earlier age that we men tend not to. And a woman would stand up, and she would either say something, or she might open her hands, or she might do a gesture, and her tribe knew to talk back to her. They knew what that gesture meant. And they would give her one word, maybe a series of words, maybe they would sing out, maybe they would ululate, yeah, something like that. And so this is what they did. When she reached out, they would talk back to let her know she was not by herself, that she had a posse, that she had community. So we're going to do that now. When I do like this, I want you guys to give me one word. One Anglo-Saxon interrogative gruntable. That's right, you said it in your head. What? WTF without the TF. That's what I want. I want you to give me the word. What? Right? Now I want you to first give me that word. Let's see if you can do it. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, why don't we try that again? 1, 2, 3. 1, Okay, now I want you to mix that with the sound that popped in your head, the impulse when you first discovered that many of us in the adult world are hypocrites. That there was a distance between what we said and what we did. There was a distance between what we tried to tell you to do and what we actually were pulling off ourselves. Remember that impulse that happened when you began to distinguish and disseminate yourself away from the adult world enough to be able to see yourself as an individual human being who could critique what's going on. Let's try that what? On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. What? Right. Now I want you to mix that sound of incredulity, like you can't believe what you've just seen. And I want you to transform that into what happens when you're at a concert and somebody just drop a series of words and you're like, damn. Right? Like, I don't know, you turn to your girl or your boy and you're like, all right? So let's hear that what, right? Mixed with that. On the count of 1, 2, 3. What? All right. 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 All of those were the things our ancestors went through, those multiple sort of impulses toward understanding, toward being together, toward feeling out what's being said. What? So let's take it back to the dawn of time. Before technology tamed our minds, when a man took his hands and began to clap. And that was the beginning of the boom, boom, bap. Let's take it back to the dawn of time. Before technology tamed our minds, when a woman started humming to an animal's call. And that was the beginning of the yes, yes, y'all. Yes, yes, y'all.
Yes, yes, y'all.
What? Yes, yes, y'all.
Yes, yes, y'all.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning. The word I'm looking for is one Anglo-Saxon interrogative gruntable, which is what?
What?
Yes, yes, y'all. Yes, yes, y'all. It's like that, it's like that, it's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. For real, according to ethnomusicologists and social linguists, it's like that. So once again, here we are again, needing to feel what it means to be skin. To feel the systole and diastole of the human heart getting rolled into poetry and whatever comes from the human soul. We know the body has intelligence. The intellect cannot dismiss a consequence of biocultural experience. But let's take a quick trip and get a sense of what it means for me, you to be human beings. Back in a time of which we cannot recall, our ancestors drummed in the hum of night. Up under these same stars they believed were gods shining down as they danced by the firelight. Their bodies started moving, voices started grunting, imitating animals. They knew they would be hunting on the next day to provide sustenance for their tribe. This was a ritual intended to recognize that life is born of death. Like sunrise and sunset cycling from east to west, the drums would beat, feet began to step, moving from right to left, and the men leapt as the chants began to rise from the women's breath. This is why this thing we do calls the blood. It's been this way since we crawled from the mud, an ancient thing banging in the body and the mind that we've been grooving to, people, since the dawn of time. So check it. Let's take it back to the dawn of time. Before technology tamed the mind, a man took his hands and began to clap, and that was the beginning of the boom, boom, bap. Let's take it back to the dawn of time. Before technology tamed the mind, a woman started humming to an animal's call, and that was the beginning of the yes, y'all. A yes, yes, y'all. A yes, yes, y'all. It's like that, it's like that, it's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. It's like... Whether Irish or English or Spanish, Danish or Swedish or Polish, Russian or Turkish, Italian, German or Kurdish, Japanese or Assyrian, Japanese or Armenian, Portuguese, Hungarian, Hebrew, Zulu, Bavarian, no matter the tongue you speak, every language, it has a beat that the body instinctively translates into music. See, what science has found is we are creatures of sound, and our ears need to seek rhythmic patterns in human speech. Like the words I'm spitting, hear the rhythm that's in them even before, like. The words I'm spitting, hear the rhythm that's in them even before you get a hint of any content I'm kicking. You first think nothing of it, but the verbal percussion begins to drumming inside of you, and then your blood begins rushing. Your pulses get to throbbing, your head begins to bobbing. You feeling the effect of what the rhythm has been plotting. It's gotten you to synchronize your alpha waves and realize that rhythm's more than musical, but structurally underlies each and every atom to plasma scattered on Saturn. Every stage of matter's organized in a rhythmic pattern, which is architectonic. Everything has a tonic, everything has a cycle, everything has a phonic. Life depends upon it because we're engineered to want it. This thing that remains, refrains, comes back as chronic. This thing that haunts us all like a ghost in the mind. We've been dancing with y'all, dancing with y'all, dancing with y'all since the dawn of time. So check it, let's take it back to the dawn of time. Before technology came to mind, a man took his hands and began to clap. And that was the beginning of the boom, boom, bap. Let's take it back to the dawn of time. Before technology came to mind, a woman started humming to an animal's call. And that was the beginning of the yes, y'all. A yes, yes, y'all. A yes, yes, y'all. It's like that, the diggity, that, y'all. It's like 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 a that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. It's like a it's like that. Thank you for playing along. Now, hopefully as what I just delivered makes clear. Part of it was sort of in spoken word. The other part of it was in rap, hip-hop cadence. However, they're interchangeable, right? They can go back and forth, back and forth. It's nothing that's really just written out and complete just unto itself, though there are some distinguishing markers. Now, what I hope to point out is that this thing we call musified speech has existed in every culture. Why? Because it's how you make people listen. If you want people to listen, you have to emulate something that they feel internally. What is that? Our very first sound. Who remembers the very first sound, the very first thing they heard? That's the very first sound you heard. So here you are, this little water creature, floating inside of mama, right? Now you're in this amniotic sac, the sac of saline water. What's going on? What happens when you touch water in a bathtub? What happens besides your hands getting wet? You get ripples. Now you understand yourself as this little water creature inside of mama in this water, and this heartbeat is traveling its way through that water. So what's hitting you is ripples. So not only are you hearing the heartbeat, what else are you doing? You feeling it. So you're like, hey. Right? Now while that's going on, you're hearing the outside of your community. Because mama is the scrim between you and the outside world. So while you're hearing all this and feeling all this, you're also hearing this. Outside of her. So when you are kicked out of mama, that's you flying across the floor. You instinctively want to move yourself toward a source of rhythm and a source of community and a source of language. It's in you. There's no way to get around it. It's in all of us. And every culture that we could think about have had a sort of musified speech brought together to help bring its community together. Whether it's the Japanese zenza, whether it's the Anglo-Saxon skop, the Norwegian skald, the West African griot. Okay, there's also the yeoman or the gleeman. There's the troubadours. And they had the fabliaux and the Galliard, different types of that. All of this has happened throughout history, throughout culture, because we needed to. All of these could go under the spoken word arts. All of it. Now for me, I prefer at times to call myself a literary performer. A literary performer. But I understand what's meant with the spoken word arts. The thing about it is that we have to understand that there are multiple kinds of spoken word arts. And there's an umbrella. It's an umbrella term. So, who can think of one type of spoken word art? Basically, we're talking rhythmic, musical, or we're talking about speech meant to bring people to listen, sculpted in such a way as to talk to a larger audience than just, let's say, your friend. What do we have here? Yes?
Slam poetry.
Slam poetry. Well, yeah, absolutely. Slam poetry. Now, here's the thing about slam poetry, is that the slam part is really just the competition. That's really just a competition. For those unfamiliar with slam poetry started in Chicago in the 1980s at a place called the Get Me High with an individual named Mark Smith. And it is a competition that was also based upon something which was very popular at the time. Now it's called the WWE. It used to be called the WWF. And so thus the term slam. Picking somebody up, taking them on the top rope, bam, slamming them down. So the competition part of it is you have spoken word, you go into a place, and you have people who are going to judge you. And you do this normally in a crowd, a bar, which is mostly where it was. And so they would judge you from 0 to 10. 10 being a poem that causes simultaneous elation throughout a crowd. 0 being a poem that means, you know, I wish I had a time machine so I could go back and make sure your grandparents weren't born, to make sure that your parents weren't born, to make sure you weren't born, to make sure you could never write that poem. Okay? That's what that means. So that's pretty much what it is. But it's designed to say, how can we get people to actually listen? And there are techniques that we've used to make that happen. Who could think of other things? Other forms of spoken word, musified speech formed in such a way as to make a large crowd listen. We just spoke about one. We just talked about one. Hip-hop. Well, and that's the thing, right? We talk about hip-hop, right? Hip-hop, the way I see it usually is, it's a larger umbrella, as I think Mr. Whitten pointed out. And hopefully you will listen to him because he was really dropping some gems on you. Really dropping some gems on you that I think you're going to find really germane later on to what you have to write. He was really, really bringing the knowledge. So if you missed something, if you were talking amongst yourselves and with your friends, and it's something you didn't write down, if you didn't write down most of what he said, you are impoverished. You have missed out on a lot. You need to go and get that man and say, excuse me, let me run something else by you. Okay? Because he was really trying to help you out. But yes, hip-hop is a larger umbrella term. Rap would be more like its emissary. Like if you think about hip-hop as a nation, rap is probably its ambassador. Right? And so we listen to hip-hop being the musical part because you can listen to hip-hop music and know that it's hip-hop music even if there's no spoken component to it. Right? And actually when I was coming up about your age, they would always put like instrumental tunes on an album so you could practice your own flow, or because so that DJs could play it and then you could hear the music just played by itself and still have a good time. So what else? We could talk about comedy. It's also a form of spoken word. Who else can think of one? Yes. Singing is more of the musical arts, but yes, there is a space in between singing and speaking that is called recitative. It means it's recitative, right? To recite. So you can go, like if I wanted to talk to you like this, I could also break out into song and then go back to speaking to you like in that way. So that actually is a musical term. It happens in opera a lot. It also happens a lot in musicals. They go back and forth between the spoken and the song, right? Anybody else? Yes.
Battle rap you want?
Well, yeah, that would be back, but battle rap is a form of rap. Right? So it would be up under that's umbrella. Battle rap would strictly be the subject that you choose to sort of rap about. Right? And we'll talk about maybe some of that in a second. Absolutely. So another one would be storytelling. Every culture has that, a narrative form that begins to place what we feel about as a culture into a story form. And then another one. We call it homiletics. Anyone familiar with this word? You know what it is? Preaching. Preaching. Other things, political speech. Political speech. So it's a huge umbrella, what we call the spoken word arts. So don't just think about it necessarily in the form of slam poetry, but it runs a whole gambit of many, many things. Speech brought together to be able to bring people together. And usually we employ some sort of musical thing to it. Why? Because music is the thing that makes somebody lean in. If I start bringing rhythm into something I'm saying, all of a sudden people look up and they're affected differently. If I say I invade with jazz grenades and I step back and act a funk attack and stand exact jack, got the knack of yak and can drop the fact to get the cats who clack clack to quit that, all of a sudden I get these faces. They're like, okay? That is what spoken word, hip hop, these things do. They take these elements that we find in what is poetic so that we can pull the ear back to the subject matter. I think I first discovered this with my grandfather. I'm going to give you some lived perspective here. I was one of those, I was born in a place called Mississippi. I grew up in a place called Chicago. And in Mississippi, my great-grandfather, he was one of those guys who worked on the railroad. And in working on the railroad, they needed someone called the caller. Now, the caller was an individual who would tell stories, but would also sing rhythmically so that everybody could hit the nail at the same time, right? And so one of his songs that he would sing was, I am working now, all day long, Lord, here comes the sun, traveling tracks of sky, whoa, whoa, Lord, And so when he sang that song, when I was a 6-year-old kid, I loved his voice, but I didn't really realize what it was he was doing. What my great-grandfather was doing was he was taking an image that he saw every day, 2 images he saw every day, the train and the sun. And he was saying this train is traveling down the tracks just like the sun travels up the tracks of the sky. So he was making a metaphor. He was making a connection in his world. And my great-grandfather was illiterate. He could not read. So what he did was he made up these stories and these songs as mnemonic devices. What is that? That means that he wanted to have them so he could remember them. And so he sculpted them into some form that he could take with him. And that's what we've done with spoken word as a species. We've taken that with us. Everyone here probably has stories of family, stories of the country you may have come from, story of the country where your people come from. You carry those with you, and they deserve and they desire to be spoken. I'm going to stop here for a second. Any questions or thoughts so far? Because I really want to engage with you and be more than a talking head with you. I want to give you the lived perspective on things. So anytime you need me to engage with something, please do so. I want your minds active, because when you get back to your home or wherever it is that you do your writing, it is just going to be you with your own head, right? And you're going to have to find a way to access what's up in there to put that down on paper and form and write towards your thesis. So when you have questions, let's exchange and go back and forth. Any questions so far? Now, where I think Mr. Whitten started, I think it was very appropriate to start in the 1970s, maybe even the 1960s. And part of that was because there was a huge change going on in the country. After the civil rights struggle in the 1950s, after it began, because the civil rights struggle still continues, right? But after what started off in the 1950s, it started to go toward the 1960s. There became a much more radical assessment of what was happening in the United States. And cultures from all over the United States, let's say different ethnic groups from all over the United States, felt that. You wound up having Abby Hoffman, who was also a radical, and he would talk about things. He was also hooking up with the Brown Berets, which were also a Latino Chicano group out of California, who was also hooking up with the Black Panthers, who was also a counterpart of that. So all of these groups started to really come together. And when they started to come together, they started to talk about what was going to be, what do they have in common with one another. And A group that was really leading that, even though despite the name, it was called the Black Arts Movement. The Black Arts Movement. Now, the Black Arts Movement was began ostensibly by three people. It was a guy named Amiri Baraka, another guy named Larry Neal, and it was also pushed by a woman named Sonia Sanchez, who was still around. And one of the surviving members, his name is Askia Touré, who lives in the city of Boston. And so they started that, and they began to move out to other groups and talk to them about, hey, you, my Latino brother and sister, let's talk about what we got going on. Let's talk about what it means to create art from our own particular cultural power. Now, where'd they get that? Well, it's a couple things. You guys are familiar with the Harlem Renaissance?
Yeah.
Somewhat familiar with it? Okay. What you may or may not be as familiar with is to understand that what we now understand as the Harlem Renaissance, so much of it was shaped by an argument. It was shaped by an argument, and that argument would begin to shape arts in this country in many different ways. It was said at the time that there was a uniquely ethnic kind of art that was not affected by anything else, or that is something strictly, let's just say, Latino or black way of speaking, way of presenting art. And that was a prevalent notion, a belief. And New York was the place where a lot of this discussion was going on. What happened is there was a guy named George S. Schuyler, who was an African-American conservative, who said, there's no such thing as a particularly ethnic art. He started talking about how you can find connections in the blues to the Russian Muskiks who were there at the steeps of the Russian plains, and he went all over that. And so he said, that's crap. I don't believe it, whatever. George Schuyler was a very interesting guy. He married a white woman in the 1930s. He was a black man married a white woman in the 1930s. First off, that's going to get you killed in most states in the 1930s. Second thing is that he raised his daughter to be a concert pianist, and he raised her on a strictly macrobiotic vegetarian diet, which was unheard of at the time. He was also doing yoga and meditation that he had learned from people who had come from India, and so he was a very interesting guy, very interesting guy. And so what he said, no, that's not true. It prompted a young writer at the time to have to defend whether there was a such thing as a strictly ethnic way of speaking art. Guess who that young writer was? Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes. George Schuyler's work was called the Art Hokum, which means basically that's... Langston Hughes wrote an article in The Nation in response to George Schuyler, and it was called The Artist and the Racial Mountain. And it began this whole debate, even amongst other groups, as to what makes us us. Why am I Latino? Why am I Chinese? Why am I this? What makes me thus? How do I express this in my own way? And usually they found their way to spoken word. Now, out of that whole argument grew this group. BAM is what they would call the Black Arts Movement. Where did they get that from? You won't believe. They got the idea of how to go about creating ethnic, your own type of spoken word. You won't believe it, but it was from the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. Irish people. The British had taken over Ireland. The Irish and had forbidden the Irish people to dance their traditional dances, to speak in their traditional language, to wear their traditional clothing, to braid their hair in traditional ways that they had done, to do their spoken word in the way they wanted to play their music. And what happened is, a couple of people, one of them was a writer named W.B. Yeats, who said, to hell with that. We're going to use our traditional Irish culture as a way of resistance against British oppression. And that's what they did. And with the help of others, they started the Abbey Theatre. And that same spirit began what we call as the Black Arts Movement. And it began other also movements here in the United States. A group you want to check out, if you really want to talk about spoken word and some of its real beginnings here in the modern form. It's a group called the Last Poets. There were several iterations of them, but the three you really want to check out, one guy who I'll talk about in a minute, his name is Guyland Kane. Another guy's name is David Nelson. And the third one is Philippe Luciana. Philippe Luciano was also part of a group called the Young Lords, which was a hardcore group, political and social action group, primarily of people who were from Puerto Rican, primarily from of Puerto Rican descent, but also not completely, because there were also people who were from Quisqueyan, who were from the Dominican Republic, who were also part of this. And so what Philippe Luciano did was he created spoken word that addressed what his people were addressing, what they were dealing with, because he was part of an immigration of people who are from the DR and people who are from Puerto Rico who came here in the 1950s. And so this is one of his pieces. I'm going to read it to you and forgive some of the language. Hibaro. Does anyone know what a hibaro is? I'm sure some of you might. No, not Hebrew. But you know, that's what we do as human beings, right? We hear something that sounds familiar and we connect to it, right? So hibaro, yeah. Did you hear her? She said there are people who live in Puerto Rico, right? But where do they mostly live? Well, they're in the Caribbean, of course, right? But the hibaro is sort of it's a Spanish, it's primarily Puerto Rican, but it's a word that basically means hillbilly. People who were poor, people who were downtrodden, people who couldn't get enough to eat all the time. They basically lived up in the mountains. And they were the people in Puerto Rico, they were the ones who were the most scorned. It's like if you wanted to call somebody out of their name in Puerto Rico, you would call them a hibaro. You know, that kind of thing. You know, just like if you want to call somebody of African American descent out of their name, there's a word you would use, which is exactly what he uses in here. And you'll hear how Philippe Luciano, what he attempts to do is he attempts to bring together the Puerto Rican, Latin American understanding of what that is with what it means to be that in America, but also with what it means to be juxtaposed next to others. So some of it. Hibaro, my pretty father of my yearning for the soil, the land, the earth of my people. Father of the sweet smells of fruit in my mother's womb, the earth brown of my skin, the thoughts of freedom that butterfly in my insides. Hibaro, my pretty, sweating bullets and blood and bed bugs, swaying slowly to the softly strummed strings of a 5-string guitar, remembering ancient empires of sun gods and black spirits and things that were once so simple. How times have changed, man. How man has changed time. Unnatural, screams the wind. Unnatural. Hibaro, my pretty. Fish smells and cane smells and fish smells and cane smells and tobacco and depression makes even God smell foul. As foul as the bows of the ship that vomited you up on the harbors of a cold metal city to die with no sun and no sand and no palm trees. And you clung to the slimy ribs of an animal called the marine tiger in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hibaro, did you know you man? I love the curve of your brow, the slant of your baby's eyes, the calves of your woman dancing. I dig you. You can't hide from me. I ride with you on subways. I touch shoulders with you in dances. I make crazy love to your daughters. Yeah. You my cold man. And I love you because you mine. And I will never let you go. I'll never let you go. Forget about self. We together now. And I'll never let you go. Never. Now you're hearing that, many things which you hear a lot in spoken word. Anyone want to maybe point out, first off, what do you think of that? We're talking 1965. 68 maybe. Many things which are still prevalent today, right? What does it mean to be an immigrant coming here? He speaks about the Marine Tiger. The Marine Tiger was a very famous ship that brought a lot of people from the Caribbean here to America. Right? And so it's like, what does it mean to leave your homeland? What does it mean to find yourself here? What does it mean to find yourself destitute? What does it mean to find yourself othered? What you find a lot in this is what you also find a lot in spoken word. And that's what you want to look for, the repeated line. Think of the repeated line of any spoken word presentation as its thesis statement. It's the thing that someone wants you to remember. That's why it's repeated. It's because it's saying, let me bring your mind back to this. This is where everything is going to flow out of. See how what I'm saying matches what is going on in the thesis line that I've stated. So when you find yourself getting lost many times in a spoken word piece, go back to and see if it has a repeated line. That will help you. You also find politics in this piece. Social issues in this piece. Racial issues in that piece. Things that we tend to keep coming back to. Why? Because if you were born poor, downtrodden, destitute, and othered in this country, it's difficult for you to create art that does not deal with those issues at some point in time. And if you're creating art that doesn't deal with those issues at some point in time, you're trying to create art that doesn't deal with those issues. It's like when I walk into a place and I know it's like me and one other black person. It's like two flies in the buttermilk. Right? And they don't look at me. I'm like, you trying not to see me. Because there ain't no way I'm going to walk up in here with all of this milk and you ain't checking me out. I know you see me, but you're averting your eyes because you're trying not to see me. So let's not play that game. Let's not play that game. So I'm getting in your grill. We're going to recognize each other. Because you know if it goes south, you're going to be looking at me to help you. Okay? So we have to deal with these issues. But it's about how we deal with these issues. Spoken word is a way for us to deal with that. Now, when did this start to also rise? As I think Mr. Whitten was pointing out, it became a social issue because they started to take money out of arts programs in the schools. Started to take it out. So when people have nothing, they go back to what they have, which is words. So you can't take my language and you can't take my heartbeat. So if I'm left with rhetoric and I'm left with the heartbeat, I'm going to build something from that space. So, battle rap. Somebody mentioned it. Wasn't going to go into this space, but somebody mentioned it. I would say probably the extant piece that we have of spoken word. The piece that goes furthest back that we have in its completion is a poem. And it was originally a spoken word poem by a guy who some of you might have heard of, named Homer. Homer. Homer was an ancient Greek poet, blind. We don't know if he really existed, but he created a couple of great pieces that we still read today, even though it wasn't read in his time, called the Iliad. This is a long poem, probably the longest piece of spoken word text we have available. This piece was spoken in a rhythm called dactylic hexameter. What is that? That basically means that you have one beat followed by two unstruck beats, another 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 beat followed by two. And sometimes this last one you can play around with. So it's back, back, back. Right? Now that was a very Greek rhythm. Dactyl meaning from the finger, hexameter meaning 6. So what Homer did was he created a piece that he brought together from other spoken word pieces about heroes going off to the Trojan War. These guys were gangsters. They were straight warriors. One of them, his name was Achilles. He's the son of a goddess and a father named Peleus, who's human. So when you open up the Iliad, this is what it says. Men naede thea peleadeo Achilleos. In ancient Greek, men naede thea peleadeo Achilleos. It means, speak, goddess of the anger of Achilles, Peleus' son. Now think about what that's saying. Speak, goddess of the anger of Achilles. In other words, tell us why he's pissed off. Right? Now what you'll find, this anger part, do we find this often in hip hop and in spoken word? Next thing, why is he pissed off? Because the Greeks have invaded towns, and Agamemnon, who is the chief amongst them, has stolen a woman from a town, and that woman's been taken away from him. So he wants to go to Achilles and makes Achilles feel as bad as he's feeling. So he does what? He takes the woman that Achilles has stolen. Disrespect of women off the bat, right? Yeah. Do we sense a lot of that sometimes? So Achilles is upset. He goes to the beach and he basically goes and cries to his mama and says, he took the woman I'm supposed to have. The Greeks gave her to me, right? And he took her. So he's whining about it. Now, here's the reason why he's upset about it. Because there were two things that the ancient Greeks mostly fought for. They didn't believe in something called heaven like we do in a post-Christian world. They believed that maybe they go to a place called Elysium, but that comes later. But they believed when they died, they went down to Hades and they existed as some bat-like being hanging up on a cave and whatnot, chattering away until somebody sacrificed blood for you. Two things they fought for. Kleos. You know what that is? Glory or rep. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? Other thing they fought for was called time. You know what that is? Bling. Bling to them was the material possessions that you got from kicking ass in war. So what was it? Of course, gold. Of course, a chariot. Of course, you got arms. And of course, what do you think was the best thing you got from kicking ass in war? So you think about it. Gold, a ride, arms, and women. Does that sound familiar?
Yes. You get gold chains, a car,
a gun, and a girl.
Yeah.
Now this is back to the first extant text, the complete extant text that we have in Western culture. All the way back 3,400 years ago. So I thought to myself, all right, so this is what I did for my master's thesis. I said, the Iliad is a piece of gangster rap. My dean said, can you prove it? Yeah. So look at the way we got gold, chariot, arms, women. Achilles has he has a group of people called his Myrmidons. Basically, that's his posse. He has his boy, Patroclus, who winds up dying, and Achilles has to swear revenge. Right? And so I said, what if we took the first line of the Iliad, Menen aede thea peleadeo Achilleos, and we changed it to something that was probably more modern. Menen aede thea Achilleos, which is speak goddess of the anger of Achilles. Speak the anger. So I thought, what if Achilles spoke his own anger? If he spoke about what was pissing him off, and he did it in the rhythm of his culture. What would he sound like? He'd probably sound like a gangster rap. So I called him MC Kill. Everybody knows that I'm the greatest warrior in Greece. And when I kill a man with skill and ease. Yo, I don't think about it. Don't waste a lick of time. To everything a purpose and making war is mine. See, I don't go for no cowardly way of taking somebody out by some force far away. It takes steel nerves and a set of brass, you know what, to look into a man's eyes when you spill his guts, then strut across his corpse, slash at another one, and not to give a damn if he a father or an eldest son. Because if a sucker don't want to get killed, simple baby, raise up off the battlefield. Because this here is real. This is the warrior class. We get ill and we let nothing pass. It takes 3 things to be a man. Man, a chariot, a chick, and some blood on your sword hand. Right? And you imagine the Greeks. Men and ae de thea akileos. You better believe it's about Time and Kleos. Men and ae de thea akileos. You better believe it's about Time and Kleos. Right? And then he goes into the part where he speaks about why they're there and how he's been betrayed and how his boy Patroclus dies and how he has to go and revenge his boy Patroclus. And what does he do? He goes and he says to his myrmidons, get my I need to strap up and go handle some biz. Right? But he can't go handle it because why? Patroclus has worn his stuff. He's out there on the battlefield. Patroclus is killed. Hector takes the armory, the arms, and then what does he do? He goes to his mama again. Mama, I need new armor. So mom hooks him up. He goes back out there. He kicks the right? That's everything that we see in the first extant piece of spoken word. The one that we have the most complete text of. Spoken word. Spoken in a rhythmic language. Is a piece of gangster art. So these things, between the two, we have to understand about the roots of where these things come from. Hip-hop, spoken word, is primarily affected also by the lyric tradition of spoken word. The lyric tradition, whereas one focuses on the self and one's feelings and what it means to be me, what it means to be me as an individual living in this world. And if you vibe with my story and our stories come together, then we both have the same story. That I can rap to you, I can talk to you, I can be funny with you, I can call to you. All of that is going to somehow reach you. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you've learned something.